Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm very happy to host this talk by Suzana Simoes, who will be leading our live with the theme, The Powers of the Soul. Before we get to Suzana, I have two announcements. First, there is a weekly podcast like series called Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life, based on the works of Joanna de Angelis. There is a new episode every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. The Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks, based on the works of Joanna de Angelis, will offer a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, bringing insights, actionable tips, and real life advice to help you lead a better life. Please subscribe to the USSF YouTube channel to receive notifications of new episodes. Also, on the screen, please note there is a QR code. If you want to help the USSF produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, please scan the QR code on screen to make your donation. Now, back to Suzana. Together with everyone watching this live, I want to give you a very warm welcome. It is so good to have you here to discuss the powers of the soul. Before she starts to enlighten us in the next hour, please allow me to introduce Suzana more formally. Suzana Simoes is an active worker of the Spiritist movement. Dr. Simoes spends her time between her professional work as a doctor of physical therapy, her family, and the dissemination of Spiritism. Suzana has worked as a member of the Florida Spiritist Federation of Florida and the United States Spiritist Federation. She is one of the founders of the Conscious Living Spiritist group in Miami, where she works primarily overseeing the work in English. She is an active speaker in the U.S. and abroad. Good to have you here, Suzana.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to share with you some thoughts about the powers of the soul. Very often, in our journey of spiritual enlightenment, we are focused, rightly so, looking into our limitations and the opportunities, areas of opportunities for transformation and growth. Not as often as probably we should and could, we are looking at the powers that we have, the forces that we have in our favor that we can be utilizing to propel ourselves forward. It's important to remember as we get started here today that in the Gospel of John, we find the sentence by Jesus who said, "Whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than this." Well, there isn't greater power than the power of consciousness. So when we think about our powers, the power of consciousness, the power of awareness, the power of presence, of understanding, of connecting with who we are as expressions of God, as God ourselves, relatively speaking, within the limitations of humanity, but we are God. We have the potentialities. We are heirs of the Creator. And so, having that awareness, it is perhaps the first important step as we start to reflect on what does that mean and what powers are there available to us. Um, One of the most powerful things that we have, it is the power of our minds. If we are God's heirs, if we are alike, um, godlike, we have in ourselves the power of love and the power of intelligence. And we have our minds. The mind, it is very powerful. And the mind is the place where our thoughts will be formed. They are the result of these energy that we call in Spiritism the mental energy. And through this energy that we project, our forms are, our thoughts are formed and they are projected, and they will be constructing, influencing our reality. So the mind is a very powerful force. It's going to influence our brain, who is going to process all these ideas, and it's going to respond, physically speaking, with consequences to our physical body, to our well being. So, the very first thing that I would want us to think about, it is the power of our mind. How aware are we of this power that we have? And if we are aware, how aware we are on how we are utilizing the power of the mind. And beyond that, are we aware of the elements that are part of our thought process? For example, we live in a time where we talk very often about the power of the mind. We talk very often about positive thinking. But are we really aware of everything that entails and everything that all the components that compose our thoughts? They are part of our thinking process. So when we think about the mind and the elements of the mind and our thinking, there are some forces that we have within ourselves that we could more often not only be aware but tap into them to help them to leverage, to propel us forward in our evolutionary journey. So our talk, our reflection today is about bringing this awareness to the forefront of our beings so that we can tap into these potentialities that we have. We are all, if you're here listening to this, I think I can assume that you are committed to your enlightenment process. You are in that journey. So it would make sense that we are aware of the tools that we have that can help us to move forward in a secure way. So when we think of the mind, we have within our minds, and it's important to make it clear and to differentiate that the mind is a property of the spirit, not of the physical body. So our brains without the spirit is dead matter. Our thoughts, our ideas are not generated in the physical body, they are generated in the immortal spirit. This immortal spirit is the source of these projections. So we have within ourselves our impulses. Our impulses, they speak about the power of our reactions. So it is our instinctive life. This instinct is there, it is divine, and it has a divine purpose of protecting us, of guaranteeing our lives. So a lot of our reactions come from the power of our instincts. We have within ourselves our desires, and our desires speak about the power of our themes. So each one of us, an immortal spirit in an evolutionary process, brings within ourselves a primary theme, a theme that is present in our day to day lives, in our interactions, in our relationships, in the circumstances of our daily lives, that we may be more or less conscious of what it is. But it is a force that plays a role in our daily living, just as our impulses are also a force that is being played in our day to day experiences. We have reason. Reason speaks about the power and the force of our humanity, different than any other uh, kingdom, any other creature. Humankind has the power of reasoning. And with reason, we are able to, for instance, override our instincts when we realize, for instance, that what we have decodified as a threat is truly not a threat. We can change our reactions to actions, and that is the power of being a human being. We have our memory. The memory talks about the power of our story, the story of this immortal spirit with all the experiences, with all the events in the spiritual journey of that being. We have our imagination. The imagination talks about the power of the creative power that we all have within ourselves. We are like God, co creators. God creates, we co create in a smaller scale, but we are constantly creating, particularly and especially our own destiny, our own reality. We have will. Will speaks about the power of our wanting. What is it that we want for ourselves? What is it that we're seeking? Where is that we are directing our energy, our attention at any given moment? And we have our sentiments that speak about the power of our feelings, of our emotions that are playing a role in every single thought and again in every single experience that we have. Perhaps you have never really stopped to think about all these forces that we have within ourselves. And when we think about thoughts, the complexity of the thinking process, the complexity of these element, this human element that we create, that the mind creates, and that sometimes we address, we talk about it in rather superficial, a little bit shallow ways, a little bit a black and white approach, denying or ignoring the complexity and all the forces that go into thinking. So let's look at a few of those, and one of them is the power of our memory. And I like to think of our memory as a sensitive plate that is under the influx of the light can collect images. So every single powerful, meaningful experience that we have, especially experiences that are loaded with emotional content, they are archived in the mind. They become part of the database of the spirit. And these images, they lay on top of each other. They are superimposed on one another without ever getting mixed. So each one of us bring within ourselves these, I don't know, like numerous images and experiences that are archived in ourselves. And these memories, this story is affecting at any given moment, more or less conscious, our thinking process. And the power and the force of our memories is we can we can talk about different ways that it can become a force in our favor. But one of them is that we can tap into our memories to see what have we done in the past that has worked out, and use from these experiences to keep going in the right direction. But we're also able to look back into these experiences to see what did not go right, and now use that memory to leverage us and to help us to choose differently and to choose better for ourselves. These memories are within us, and a lot of it is archived, is present in our unconscious. We also have the power to tap into this um, background information, and it's there. It's kind of hidden, but it's not unreachable. So we can commit ourselves to get to know this content so that we can deal with the content in a more conscious way, because the content that is on the background is affecting our daily living very much so. um, and a lot of times, as we are trying to change, as we are trying to do things differently, we find ourselves stuck in certain behaviors and certain patterns, not knowing why. And often enough, the why lies on this history, on the stories that are in the background and are affecting our daily living. So there are ways in which we can tap into this, and one of them certainly is through psychotherapy, which is a powerful way that we have psychology to help us to guide us safely to into these memories and into this story. But we also can do that through meditation when we find the time in our very busy lives to actually surrender to stillness and to open a space to breathe, to be, and to allow for this content to actually surface so that we can see what's being unseen until that moment. Now, there's also another God mechanism that allows us to tap into this powerful force within us, which is pain. Pain will do something interesting, will kind of crack the dryness and the the rough ground of our consciousness. It kind of opened those little cracks that allows a lot of times some of this content to emerge and for us to be in touch with it. So these memories, these experiences, this story is a powerful force within us, and it's something that when we are committed and we are courageous and we are humble and we are open, can become a very powerful way that we can tap into a resource within us to, again, uh, propel us in the direction of our enlightenment. Now, we also have the sentiments. We did talk about the feelings. And when we talk about the feelings, I like to use an image of that is related to photography. And in photography, the cliche is the negative image that is obtained within the dark room. And from this negative image, we can extract innumerable positive proofs. So, similar to what happens in photography, in the same way, thought is the matrix that is composed in the intimacy of the being. And from these matrix, we can also create many, many different manifestations of our individuality. But the same way that the formation of the cliche, the negative image, is going to depend of the sensitive film that is there, in our case, the feelings are going to precede the elaboration of any mental creation, of any mental image. So, this is a very powerful idea and understanding, the understanding that preceding the formation of our thoughts, before the formation of the ideas that we are projecting, pre-existing any thought, there are our feelings. And the feelings will then shape, they will add to the thoughts its vibratory frequency. It will add to the thought its density, its colors. So I may, for instance, just to make this a little bit more tangible for us, I may look at someone who is, for instance, I consider that person to be more evolved than myself. And I may say, that person is very good. It's a very good human being. And someone else might do the same. Look at that person, recognize um, that person's achievements, and say, that person's a very good person. Although the words and the idea expressed verbally is exactly the same, I can say this from a place of envy. And someone else can say the same thing from a very altruistic place, a place of admiration, a place where I look at someone and say, wow, this person is amazing. And I just want to know what he or she has done to get to that place so I can also do the same. Or my approach can be one of envy, of jealousy. And so, spiritually speaking, the projection of the thought is completely different. If someone could see energetically where those two individuals are, they would see that one is in a very cloudy space, a space of misery, whereas the other one is in a space, a much altruistic, a much more harmonious place to be. So hence the importance of our feelings that go beyond the projection of our inner world, that allows the spirits to identify precisely where we live, mentally and psychically speaking, but also our thoughts, and immersed and embedded by our feelings, they will trigger within ourselves electrochemical processes in our physical body. And just as the atom is a very powerful and living force, but it's passive before the thoughts that will kind of guide it in the direction of good or harmful actions, the mental particle is also very strong and powerful, but it's passive before the power of our feelings. So, depending on what feelings we are harboring, we are nurturing within ourselves, if it's something that is being sustained over time, it will generate within us this accumulation of fluids that will lead us either to disease or health, that will create within ourselves an environment that's going to be either balsamic or acidic, sweet or bitter, life giving or deadly, nourishing or exhausting. And all that to the power of our feelings, of our sentiments. Again, that explains why nowadays we have so much focus and so much attention to this very important component of our humanity, because it is a very powerful force that we have, something that we need to be aware, because it does shape very much so our existence, our situation, the circumstances, and where we find ourselves. We have the power of will. And like I said, willpower is something, it's a very powerful force. The spiritist literature is going to tell us that is one of the main powers of the soul. It is a volitional impulse, meaning that it is something that um, we can train, we can activate through our consciousness, to our want. Is something that can be exercised, that can be strengthened. A lot of times we struggle with our wills, and we find ourselves in the position of Saul of Tarsus, Paul of Tarsus, better saying, when he's going to say, the things that I don't want to do, those I do, and the things that I don't want to do, I do, and the things that I do want to do, I don't do, right? So, and why is that? Because a lot of times when we're dealing with our wills, we have the will of our ego, uh, who is deeply identified a lot of times with the material, with the illusions of the world, and we have the the will of our self, and the will of our ego a lot of times still prevails, because we're scared, because we don't know any better, because we're frail. But will can be strengthened, can be nurtured. And the more we understand about the purpose of life, and the more that we educate our feelings and our heart, the better and more equipped we are to channel our will in the right direction. in the direction of the self, in the direction of goodness, of love, of the God within. So our will is going to act over our consciousness with energy, with perseverance towards the soul's desires and wants. And it's going to work together with our thoughts and with our sentiments. So when we align all those forces, our feelings that we are aware, that we are processing, our want, our thoughts, when all of those forces are aligned in one direction and they are working synergistically, we have a very powerful motor and machinery within ourselves that can really leverage our evolution and our self-esteem. Why our self-esteem? Because the moment that we start to get things right in our lives, we get to realize how able we are, how powerful we are, how divine we are. When we get things right, this experience, this feedback loop really enables us and gives us what no material experience will ever give us, which is the realization of our own light, of our own beauty. And that becomes a self nourishing process that helps us to shift from this paradigm that we live in of scarcity, of darkness, of evil, to a paradigm of divinity, of light, of positivity, of certainty that, going back to our opening statement, that yes, we can do this and we can do a lot more than this. Those, our will, our feelings, our thoughts, they will have the power to either keep us grounded to the material realm or create the wings that will help us to fly and to experience different levels of realization and achievement. So when we think about our thoughts, getting back to our thoughts as a whole, right? The thoughts are a force that's going to determine, that's going to establish, is going to transform, is going to build, destroy, rebuild. With our thoughts, as I mentioned before, we are creating our realities. We create our identity, our spiritual identity. We create our psychic home where we live in, the atmosphere, the environment that we live in. So our thoughts, they are an extension of our inner nature. It is our own individuality in action. And every time that we're thinking, we are manifesting our souls. This understanding helps us it's the underlying science that helps us to understand the law of attraction, affinities, influences. Because when the spirits look at us, for example, they will see much more than what you're seeing right now. My image, for instance, my material expression. They see me for who I really am. Nothing is hidden because all that I am is being projected at any given time. So it's my spiritual identity. And again, that identity is going to, other minds will identify who I am, will identify my likes, my tastes, and they're going to either say, I like this, I want to be connected to this, or I don't like this, I'm going to look for someone who is like me. So anytime we want to change, so many times people come to the Spiritist Center because they feel they are being influenced, they are being obsessed. And part of the healing process, part of changing, is changing the person's vibratory frequency so that you are attuned to spirits who are also in a different vibratory frequency. So, like I mentioned before, thoughts are a force. We did mention and talk a little bit about mental energy. So, although it's something that we not see, it is matter. It is imponderable matter, and therefore it is under the laws of nature, including, for instance, the law of gravity. So our thoughts will either generate our imprisonment on Earth, or they are going to open up the path to the heights, always, always according to our interest. These idea reminds me of the passage from the New Testament when at the wedding banquet, the owner, the host, better saying, of the party will recognize that two of the guests are not properly dressed for the party, for the event. So that means that they didn't have the proper attire for that occasion. So, if it is our wish to experience the kingdom of heaven, if it is our wish to enter that space, that celebration, it is also important that we are properly dressed for the occasion. And the way that we dress ourselves is through our thoughts. Our thoughts, they will establish the environment of our home, and we are dressed also by our thoughts. So in order to enter an experience of lightness, of peace and harmony, it is necessary that we dress our emotional psychic being also with that experience. It is an experience that comes from within. Now, I hope that by now you understand the complexity of our thoughts as they embedded with our feelings. Um, our will is playing a role, our memory, our story, our desires, our themes. So when people say, you come, you see someone who's struggling, someone who's having a difficult time, and you say to that person, hey, just be positive, just have a positive thought. um, this has become such an easy thing to say, and has been disseminated in ways that I feel to be harmful many times, because are not sensitive to the complexity of thoughts. So when you say to someone, just keep a positive thought, that should never mean that the person should deny the existence of a problem, that the person should deny the existence of the feelings, no matter what they are, without labeling them, just being able to be with whatever it is. Um, that should not mean that the person is denying the process in itself. So, from a spiritist perspective, to have a positive thought is actually to be able to courageously sit with the complexity of the thought, the situation, the feelings, the story, without ever losing hope in the process, in him or herself, without ever losing hope in one's own becoming and ability to transcend and to transform the reality precisely by acknowledging the reality and allowing oneself to be with what it is. So I think that's a very important distinction that we need to make, and that takes us to the next power that we have, which is the power of choice. So now, if we are more aware of all these forces that are within us, we can choose better. And we can do so by understanding that as we evolve, we make better choices to ourselves. When we are a toddler, for instance, we all that we want to do is we want to have our basic needs attended to. So we want to eat when we are hungry, right? We want to sleep when we are tired. When we are young and enter our teenager years, a lot of our wanting and our choices have to do with our immediate desires and a lot with our physical and emotional aspirations that are related to that moment. And as we grow up and become adults and more mature beings, then we have ideals. And ideals are the result of an elaboration of our feelings and our thoughts. And our wanting now, hopefully, is directed towards a purpose, and it is supported by the will of the individual. So, our choices become better the moment that we are able to tap into all these forces that we have within ourselves and channel them correctly. So, the healing of our soul, the achievement of this place, better place, a place of more inner harmony and happiness, comes from one's ability to mobilize the forces of life again in the correct way, rightly so. And in the Spirit's book, we are going to learn that man is only unhappy when it distances himself, herself from God's laws. And when we're talking about God's love, we are talking about love, loving oneself, loving our neighbors, loving God above all. Buddha brings to us a, 8 steps that constitute a path for salvation. It's called the Eightfold Path for Salvation. And here we are going to talk now about how can we then take these forces, these powers of our soul, and channel it in a way that can truly, truly help us to establish and get ourselves to a better place. These Eightfold Path for Salvation is described, if anyone wants to revisit it, in one of Joana de Angelis' books called Plenitude. She brings this path and she will comment about it, which here I'm going to touch very briefly on each one of them. So the first item is to believe rightly. Believe rightly. So to believe rightly is to direct our thoughts in a positive, in an edifying way that's going to establish healthy purposes and is going to assist in the accomplishment of the values that we believe in. So, to believe rightly, when we believe rightly, we are tapping into a very, very powerful force that we can also develop. in our lives, which is the power of faith. So, faith has the ability to activate a lot of times unexplored and very intimate mechanisms in humankind. It can activate unused forces that can completely modify the internal landscape of the creature. The same way that we use a very small percentage of our brain power, for example, of our neurons, we also very unskilled in activating the psychic forces that we bring within ourselves. So faith helps us to mobilize some of these forces. They are there, latent, but not necessarily being used. There is a reason why, for instance, we're going to find Christ asking every single person, or so many that he healed, whether they believe in him. When he asked this question, he was actually helping the person to mobilize the resources of faith and these forces within themselves to prime their inner environment to receive the blessings of his love, of his assistance. But the person was actively engaged in the process through faith, again, priming his inner self. In other words, getting the inner environment in an appropriate condition so that the healing could take place. So, faith is powerful, and that is, it helps us to understand when we hear that faith moves mountains. It does so precisely because it activates those resources that are within each and every one of us. The other thing that Buddha is going to talk is about wanting rightly. And that is so important because many times the suffering that we experience in our lives has to do by the excessive mistake desire that is in line with the illusions of the world and of matter. It's always important when I talk about this to say that there's absolutely nothing wrong in wanting to, for instance, achieve comfort in our material life. It is the search for comfort, for well-being in the material world that's going to allow us to develop a lot of our skills, our intelligence, our creativity, actually mobilize some of the resources. But we have to be careful not to be like the rich man that was ready to follow Jesus, but wasn't ready to leave his things behind. And the issue with that man was not that he possessed things, but that he was possessed by the things that he had. So, wanting rightly is being able to truly understand what is important, what is valuable for us in this life. A lot of times, we think about the value of material things, a value that is inexistent because someone one day decided that certain things would value so much and certain things would value another price. Those were established by us. But for the more immortal spirit, what is the true value of those things? Who determined that? So it's important for us to keep that in mind and help that to guide our wanting towards the things that are eternal and the things that are really going to stay with us. It's also important that we speak rightly. So we believe rightly, we want rightly, we talk rightly, because the good words will always strengthen our character, will sweeten the heart, and will light up life. So all of us in our stage of evolution, we do carry some darkness within ourselves. And when we allow ourselves to spew that out through our words, it's as if you were taking your garbage uh, to the back of the house here, as I do. And instead of taking all the way to the trash can, I spill it on the street. And I let that to be seen and affecting now not only me, but also the life of others. So, speaking rightly, this exercise, this careful action is also very important in the way that we are dealing and mobilizing our own resources. The next step is to operate rightly. So, operate rightly, to do rightly, is both a preventive therapy technique and also a cure for our sufferings. Because every time that we do something wrong, a lot of times it took a second for that poor decision, for that poor behavior. And it might take a long time for us to be able to fix that. So to commit every day, to have intention of day every day to do things right will save us the extra work of having to repair, of having to retrace the path, of having to redo things. And then we go from doing rightly to living rightly. So, living rightly is when you decide that it's not that you want to do things right, you want that paradigm to be your everyday intent. So, it's to wake up each day and to say, I want to use all that I am and all that I have to live rightly. It is my intent, and this is so powerful. And I really recommend this small practice of setting up intents. What is your intent for today? What is your intent for every day? What is the intent for your life? Because what we intend, what we think, manifests. So when you set up your intent to live rightly, then the moment that you slip, that intent is right there on your subconscious, and you're able to right away pick yourself up. A man, rightly so, or immediately so, or even able to tap into the intent before the behavior. And therefore, that becomes a way of living. We have to have the right effort, understanding that there is no progress and no achievement without effort. So once we surpass the limits of automatic phenomena, which is just everything that happens within us automatically, if we want to achieve anything in our lives, it will require effort on our part. In the last two um, items on Buddha path for salvation is to think rightly and to meditate rightly. So think rightly provides the psychological harmony that we are all looking for, but it does something else. Thinking rightly opens this channel between us and our spiritual mentors and guides or guardian angels or the superior forces of the universe, and we're able to use the energies, the inspiration, the intuition, because again, once we set our minds and our intent and our living in this direction, we become the instruments of God here in spreading this different way of living. And meditating rightly will allow us to, again, be connected with the divine within us, with the forces within us, and to tap them and to use them in the right direction. And last but not least, not in Buddha's path of salvation, but certainly in every human being path of salvation, is the power of prayer. When nothing else is working out, is the moment that we recognize that we can't do anything without the presence of God and the connection with the source of all power and all love in the universe. And we will raise our thoughts to it and say, Lord, help me to move from darkness to light, from the light to the truth, and from death to immortality. So I hope that these reflections can help us to, it's February, it's the beginning of the new year, but for some, it's the beginning of the new day. Or anyone who listens to us and who is finding himself or herself in a disabled moment where you feel like you don't have the resources, you can't transform, just take a moment, take a deep breath, do your prayer, reconnect with the divine. We all have within ourselves what it takes, our inheritance, our beauty, the forces that can be mobilized, and that will definitely, because that is part of our destination, will take us to a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you for these reflections. I liked how you talked about not only the Eightfold Path, but also the nature of how our thoughts can affect our well-being, and that it's important that we do our best to be compassionate with ourselves in relation to our complex, often contradictory thoughts, and that we learn to, of course, take responsibility, but at the same time accept where we are at the moment and then try to work on it. Okay, we have some questions. Let's see what we got here. Okay, this is from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Where the memory of our previous incarnations where is the memory of our previous incarnations hidden? And how and when can it be accessed?
Well, so we have our memories of our incarnations in the mind. We have in the pure spirit is where our spiritual body is, where we have these experiences archived. So it's important because these experiences, they are going to shape our new incarnation. They are, as I mentioned, they are a force, and they will shape not only our physical body, they will determine some of the experiences, physical experiences that we are going to have. And they certainly have a vibratory content that will attract the people and the circumstances that we need to experience in the present moment. Now, it can be accessed to a certain extent. There's a providential reason why it is hidden. We have a difficult time dealing with the present incarnation, processing all our emotional experiences in the present moment as it is. And that is why anything and everything that becomes too much for us to process, our central nervous system and our psychic being will store outside of our vision into the unconscious, so that we will process when we are more ready to deal with those emotions. And this is for this lifetime. So we would be overwhelmed and very likely unable to function if we had access to all these memories at once. But as I mentioned, they can be accessed. Sometimes they will spontaneously emerge in insights, tendencies that we are, taking notice in our lives. Sometimes will be memories in dreams. We can have access to some of these experiences. So I see myself in another life, in a dream. So that can happen that way. And again, sometimes through the process of self-knowledge, just kind of dive into our psychic with or without the help of a therapist can give us insight in some patterns that are so ingrained in us that we have that certainty that it has been with us for a while. And a while, I mean beyond this present life.
Okay, thank you. Very good answers. This is from Yasko Arakawa. Hi, Yasko. My dear Suzana, great empowering information. Would you expand your view on the power of collective soul? Tips on how to remove ourselves from the web if delirious to our moral evolution.
So I everything that I spoke about in regards to us as individuals apply to the collective. So collectively, we also have our identity. So this planet that we live in has its own spiritual identity that is the collection, the gathering of the sum of our vibratory beings. And so we are, and that is one of the challenges for us as we try to rise, is that we are immersed in this collective vibration that we are part of, that we are responsible for, as we are contributing to it. But every time that we try to rise above, we have the power of the collective consciousness kind of a lot of times dragging us down. So it does take a very conscious effort to rise, to really tap into these powers and be different. Because, like for instance, the collective awareness still operates very much under the paradigm of an eye for an eye. Although Christ has come to teach us something very differently, that's not how we operate. We wanna see people who have made us suffering too. We wish in our spiritist way that the law will take care of them. And the law will. But the thing is that again, let's go back. The underlying sentiment is not. That is a perfect example. Which, if I have to do this lecture again, I will use that. The sentiment behind that, it's not truly an empathic and loving one. It is, I'm getting back at you, right? So I think that this is in regards to the first part of the question, but in regards to the second, do you? Yeah, I was going to ask you to bring it
Yeah.
back.
Mhm.
How to remove ourselves from the web if it deleteres to our more evolution? It's a choice, right? It's a choice. Um, the web is not at all bad. There is so much goodness in it, so we can be selective if we want, if that is our wish. um, Selective with the connections that we make, the people that we follow, the content that we allow in our social media space. So that's one of the ways that we can use it in a wise way. I think there's a lot of good things in there that can actually help us with our more evolution. And certainly there is tons of things that drag us down. and that we need to be. It's funny because we're always talking about the dangers of the web for the youth and for children, and yet we are not necessarily as careful as we should be as adults. And it's a very powerful mechanism because the web does gives us a tangible and very concrete example of what happened in the world of our thoughts. So as I project my thought into the web with a comment, with a statement, what that's going to do is I'm going to have many minds, followers who will identify with that thought and will put a like. And so as I project that, um, people identify that thought and they will respond to that thought by nourishing, by enhancing. And so when we are thinking, we are projecting our thoughts in the universal web. And in the very same way, we are getting tons of likes. So we need to be very careful with what is it that we are posting on a moment to moment basis. Because as we know, each one of us is followed by a crowd of witnesses. And some we see and some we don't. So we have to be careful with what we are posting, not only on the internet, but on the universal web.
Very good points. After all, the web is a tool, and when Kardec talks about Spiritism's point is to pursue the good, one of the ways to do that is taking responsibility for what we put out there in public.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. In terms of cause and effect, how much do our negative or positive thoughts matter when we do not act on them?
Difficult question. I think it matters more when we are nurturing them. And when we are unaware of them. If you're unaware, it's again acting on you without your knowledge. When you are aware and you choose not to, I hear so many times, and I have said that, I have this feeling it's too much for me. I can't handle it now. Maybe some other time. And we postpone. So it remains in you. It's vibrating. It's alive. It's alive. It's a little living creature that we have within ourselves. So when we become passive or in denial, or when we are again nurturing feelings that they don't add to who you are, but they take away from our vitality. I like to think about feelings this way. Feelings doesn't serve us a lot to say good or bad, but they will either add to the flow of life, they will either enhance life in us, or they will extract. So in terms of cause and effect, I did talk about, for example, the effects of feelings and thoughts within ourselves, right? If we are projecting something that is kind of an ill thought, if our feelings are ill, if we're not taking care of it, it's going to have a natural effect within us, because our physical body is sensitive to what we feel, to our psychic life, and it does respond And it's very easy to understand this concept, because if you are walking on the street and you see something and it's dark and it's late, or someone, or you hear noise, or you're scared, your body will immediately respond to that feeling, the feeling of fear, and your heart rate is going to go up. So it's a very clear, tangible example. Well, that happens. It's just not as noticeable at all times, but our body, our brain is constantly responding. And so it's not the end of the world. It's not going to harm us if we have feelings. But when the feelings are not addressed, and when they build within ourselves, and they are not helpful to us, that's when we are going to have a problem. So, yes, there is an effect to our thoughts, even when we are not acting on them. But we have to put things into perspective. Things are relative to the strength, to the duration, to, you know, our intent, our commitment to address things. All those things have also an effect.
Okay. Very briefly, because we're going to wrap up soon, but just to connect cause and effect to your answer to Yasko's question. Is it safe to say, when Spiritism talks about cause and effect, that in terms of the way cause and effect is played out, it is not done with any kind of vindictiveness? It's rather just a natural result of
Yes,
whatever you're doing.
yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
I think it's one of the most loving and educational laws that there is.
Mm,
Loving because,
mm,
for instance, if you touch a hot surface, and and that burns you, that makes you remove your hand away, so it protects you.
mm,
So the law of cause and effect protects us, guides us, and help us to understand when something is not being good for us.
mhm,
So you understand that that hot surface is not a place to touch, because it's going to harm you. And you understand that because when you touch, it hurts. So the pain is telling you, here's the limit. You shouldn't pass this. You shouldn't do this, because this is not good for you. So when we have a negative effect, the negative effect is a teaching experience. It's just a way for us to learn what serves us and what does not serve us, and help us to do differently.
right. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. One last question. This is from the International Spiritist Council. Is there a connection between our emotions and how they affect our bodies? How much evidence is there nowadays about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of evidence. I couldn't, like, just the top of my head cite at this moment, like, resources, but I think nowadays we are much more solid, scientifically speaking, about that. In many diseases, we have been able to link the emotional effects of you know, of our beings to the physical manifestations. So, with, for example, all the gastric, for example, problems that we have, how that is related to stress is a very simple example that we can give. Um, and that shows, the science nowadays shows this very straightforward correlation, and also with migraines and autoimmune disorders. So there's a number of diseases that have been linked to uh, emotional regulation. And so it's in a way, it's science showing the connection between the mind and the body.
Hmm. Sounds like a lot of connections there with the Eightfold Path, too.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, Susanna, and thank you everyone who watched today's live and those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Next Saturday, we will have Nahur Fonseca talking about the triple aspect of Spiritism. Susanna, before we close our live, can you do a prayer first, please?
Yes, absolutely. So at this time, I invite everyone to join me in this prayer of gratitude to the one who is the all source of power and strength, our Father, God, thanking for the opportunity of this day, of this moment of our lives, all that we have, but mostly all that we are. It is with gratitude and recognizing God's love and power that we end our life today, asking God to bless us all, to bless this humanity, and to bless each one of us as we press forward in our work, in our journey towards enlightenment and peace. Thank you so much, and so be it.
So be it.